get to this point of a service, there's been a whole village of people trying to get music together and liturgies together, and so much has happened to get this space together. Thank you, one and all, for what you've done to get here. Well, he wasn't really trying to find a church to found any new church. Honest. Apologies to any Lutherans in our group. But I can only imagine what kind of spiritual turmoil that Martin Luther, a Catholic monk, must have been going through about 500 years ago today. He wanted to know that a gracious God's love was truly unpreventable, really unstoppable by human machination, or unchangeable through institutional mayhem. His religious tradition could not provide him that kind of blessed assurance that there's really nothing that he could do or not do to make God love him more or less. So the Reformation to Luther is all about salvation. And who is the final arbiter of it? A human? A church? Or even the believer himself or herself? And we all know that on our bad days, we might even doubt our own worth. Can I get a witness? So Luther's legacy about rock-solid love of God is our assurance. So the Reformation quest was to put the love of God and one's place in it beyond any human question. No matter your color, gender, political stripe, number of Twitter followers, to be seen by God is to be seen always and ever in our best light. And I bear witness, and you can too, how this continues to be a blessing for people in prison or dying of a terminal disease. To realize that no hardship or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword can separate anybody from the love of God. I've seen this kind of spiritual liberation in hospital, prison, and even office hours settings when this pastoral message sinks down into someone's understanding. And they finally get it. And they rise up a different person than when they went down. And here we are, 500 years later. And we are fortunate for the changes wrung by Martin Luther's struggles. Were it not for some protestation and reformation, there might not be even women leading this congregation. Our Bible might be in another language than English. Movements towards democracy through Enlightenment thought might have been slowed down considerably had there not been first a set of reformers standing up to religious tradition and calling spiritual authority into question. Modern science would have had a longer runway to get off the ground. Religious dissent would have been more difficult. European religious dissenters, being fewer in number, if at all, would not have been so numerous in the first white settlers here, and so Puritanism and Anglicanism and even Roger Williams may not be the primary shapers of spiritual contours of this nation. Those sacred 16 words in the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, would be either unknown or phrased differently. And to end my speculation, I will hazard that we would have different spiritual and political giants than Paine, Locke, Jefferson, Emerson, Thoreau, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, to start a list. Each time you think of some finger wagger against authority, envision them as either off the scene altogether or seriously change in their orientation and argument. So what the Reformation means to me is that this life really matters. That is, matter matters. Material matter, material conditions of life are from beginning to end spiritual issues. Being hungry or unhoused, racist, war spenders, gun controllers or not. These problems are not solved until they are first understood as spiritual issues. Yeah. Now, 500 years later, is the Reformation over? Passé? The late Phyllis Tickle, a friend of some of us here, a frequenter of the Wild Goose gatherings, wrote how an Anglican bishop famously observed that About every 500 years, the church feels compelled to hold a giant rummage sale. And he goes on to say, she says, we are living in and through one of these 500 years sales. Maybe so. It's hard to critique Phyllis. Maybe I should read a little scripture first. From chapter 11 of Hebrews. Now faith is the turning of dreams into deeds. It is betting your life on unseen realities. It was for such faith that people of old were martyred. And so by relating our lives, we become aware that history is woven into God's design so that the seen event is a projection of the unseen intent. From chapter 12 of the same book of Hebrews. Now here's where we come in. Surrounded by a cloud of veterans of the faith, let's strip off all that heavy and tight-fitting clothes and run with endurance the race stretching out before us. Let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, the founder and guiding spirit of our way of life. Dreams into deeds. Stan Dotson loves that phrasing. A cloud of veterans or witnesses was one of my father's favorite comforts, that he was not alone when he got in trouble with whites-only churches around this state. Because there has been a Reformation, most historians and analyzers of religious history feel that an element of fractiousness and dissent has become legitimately part and parcel of religious affairs. Keep the faith edgy. Keep the faith challenging. It's precisely what keeps folk like you in this room coming back. But it is Luther and Calvin and the Anabaptists who model for us the right to speak truth to baked-in spiritual wrongs. To exercise this right is an act of faithful disbelief, of religious disobedience. One can have faithful belief, but why not faithful disbelief? Luther and his company have made it a matter of justice to disobey for the right reasons. And disobey civil authority. We have folks in this room go to jail, pay civil fines for protesting, resist war taxes, organize this peace church, conspire in the slowing of corporate greed, get in the way of immigration policies, and risk reputation as acts of faithful disobedience. Disobey spiritual authority we have. Also, many find that this circle as their last spiritual refuge, as dissidents or non-traditionalists, as gays, as women in ministry, as anarchists. Our spiritual practice actually includes disobeying and dismantling the idols of empires that would seek to have us do two things: stop thinking and stop questioning. It is this non-stop thinking and non-stop questioning of status quos that's the true reforming spirit. We are not waiting for a rummage sale. And here's where I provide some very selective evidence of protests and antics. Hang in with me. I'm going to do a short list, and then I'll ask you what I've left out. First, Bartolome de las Casas, when he died in 1566, had amassed a serious but lonely record of political dissent because of his spiritual regard for Native Americans. He decried the Spanish killing, raping, despoiling of native flags, native people under the flags of all at once economic, civil, and religious. Even beasts' excrement, he noted, was treated better by the Christians than native peoples. We remember him this day because he got in the way on behalf of all bearers of God's image. Anabaptist, also known as Mennonites, in Switzerland, Germany, Moravia, knew how much old Jesus was a mess, a holy mess, and they refused to break conscience on behalf of their first and only allegiance of Jesus. They got in the way, and they frustrated civil authority, and they even died. And because they have, we too have the courage to break conscience. Catholic workers, Peter Morin and Dorothy Day, refused to do the popular religious thing, but lived according to the justice and the clarity of Jesus. practicing hospitality with those on the margins, based on this very radical idea that there's a common humanity. Their rule is the works of mercy, the way of sacrifice, the establishing of sanctuaries for those in need. Catholic workers have described themselves as an anarchist movement in which all authority has come from God because the state has essentially declared itself incompetent to understand, much less participate in, the God movement. Catholic workers have become a primary truth and life to live a reformed life. Liberation theology in the 60s and 70s was believed by many of the day to be the new Reformation that we were to look for. How many people remember that one? Liberation theology has remained a first-class, first aid movement for those beaten down on the Jericho Road, but they also wanted to understand why the Jericho Road was so dangerous in the first place. Liberation theology has spawned many more liberation movements that many here participate in. Women, GLBTQ, African Americans, Asians, Womanists, even Beloved House, and community-driven justice campaigns in Asheville continue this liberation theology efforts today. Analyzing and working and analyzing. What a way to show the way to the heart of the gospel. Bread for the World, whose banner is "We can end hunger in our time," does this through community actions, faith actions, hunger programs, research, policy change initiatives, making a way, but also making waves. In 1943, Martin England, writing out of a place called Mars Hill, North Carolina, asked if others might join him in a Christian demonstration plot, a Christian social experiment in community living without race markers, with a common purse, single-minded devotion to God. A guy named Clarence Jordan said, "Why not?" And now Pam Shum's daughter Erica has been part of this Koinonia Partners movement. Missy is part of Koinonia's vision incarnated by Jubilee. Carl Kaufman is part of Habitat for Humanity's spinoff of the same vision. Betty Jane Crandall, Joyce Holliday, Tamara Puffer have been a part of the adjunctive open door community. What wonderful ways to be monkey wrenches in the status quos of racism, economic privilege, and exclusive housing. Amen. Becoming the way, the truth, the life for this region, this day, and for goodness sake. Amen. We must also mention, number 7, the new monastics like Shane Claiborne, who elect poverty and select residences in the middle of the core of the inner city and do church there. What a way to be faithful. 8, Christian peacemaker teams who advertise themselves as literally getting in the way of injustice, slowing down the ways of war and greed. 9, the sanctuary movement, practicing radical hospitality in spite of civil or religious voices threatening retribution. Thank you, Bill Ramsey, Greg and Susan Walker Wilson, for letting grace continue to have its day and her say. And now it's your turn, O fellow Protest-Ants. What evidence of the Reformation still lives? Where do you see Reformation still happening?
And the Americans who tell the truth exhibit.
Americans who tell the truth exhibit.
In the Jesus ethic, Afro-humanists, non-believers who believe in Jesus and his life and what he did.
Thank you.
Sojourners.
Sojourners, yes.
Continued partnerships with friends in Cuba.
Continued partnerships with friends in Cuba, yes.
Another magazine, Yes Magazine?
Yes Magazine.
Yes.
Thank you.
Rima Vesley Flagg this past week at Mount Cox, as she was talking about purity and pollution in the lives of white and black men.
Yeah. Former member Rima Vesley Flagg in her new book.
The Reverend William Barber and the Moral Mondays and the New Poor People's Campaign.
Reverend William Barber, Moral Mondays, New People's Campaign.
poor people.
New Poor People's.
New Poor People's Campaign.
People who work in our medical system and healthcare,
Hmm.
it's incredibly broken, but bear witness.
People who work in our incredibly broken medical system still.
Yeah.
Haywood Street Community.
Haywood Street Community. So, the Reformation continues. These are but just a few of the raindrops in that cloud of witnesses. A powerful cloud of veterans affecting the climate change the church is to effect today. Each is a way to get in the way. Each is in touch with the protest. Each has been called a foolish enterprise, full of high hopes, but full of antics. Foolish antics. Nah, they're just fools for Christ. Shaking of the church and society with their antics, 500 years of Reformation and still going strong. Do we need a Reformation today when there's already a vibrant cloud of caretakers changing our weather, taking as their lead the religion, not the religion that grows up around Christ, but rather that simpler religion of Jesus? These modern day reformers, they're basically materialists. I believe that Martin Luther helped the church most of all to stop being an organization primarily invested in soul-only or spiritually-only enterprises. What he enabled is that the now matters, the here matters, the this matters, the now, the here, the this is only in this single dimension that God is still speaking to injustice and unfairness, structural inequality. Today is that day of salvation. Today is that only day that Jesus' words come true in our hearing. Today is the only day to hear and bear witness. If God's kingdom cannot come this day to a particular situation or people, then of what use is it to speak of salvation in a future life? So how do we, this circle of mercy, join more of this Reformation? As Stan Wilson said last Sunday, we Christians are a complex people with multiple allegiances. What is the strategy to be and remain a single-minded, reforming presence in church and society? Shane Claiborne and others who have written about empire and faith suggest our path is to choose today whom we would serve, Jesus or Caesar. There is one Lord. The church has one foundation, having two, God and the United States, Jesus and a good job, God and good health, Jesus and guns, God and homeland security, God and fill in the blank. Do these really add up to anything? This God plus mentality is like having two compasses, each pointing to a different north. Which is to guide us on this Jericho road? Here's where I urge you to join the mission groups already begun here. Sermon on the Mount, Sanctuary, teaching our young people, Habitat for Humanity. Start a new one if you'd like. Get involved in someone's life, because practice changes belief. Maybe more than belief changes practice. Because when we change our practices, our brains change, and changed brains process differently. Neurons that start firing together start to wire together and fire differently. Just ask Bartolomé de las Casas, or Martin Luther King Jr., or Daniel Day, or Kenza Hested, or Joyce Holiday, or even Greg Yost if you can find him. Like ants laying down a pheromone trail, these pioneers of our faith attract others to follow, and not just on Facebook. Their antics of protest are to me a true sort of Protestantism. Carl Kaufman said from this space a couple of weeks ago, what did it mean to be a Christian in Elkhart, Indiana, when we drove to church every Sunday in our nice cars, dressed in our Sunday best? What did it mean when we heard sermons about helping the poor, about feeding the hungry, and about clothing the needy, or about social justice and nonviolence? What did hearing that in sermons mean when I could look out my window and see the effects of decades of systemic racism and poverty? Or when I could walk the 3 blocks to the L station and see people huddled in doorways or sleeping on grates? What did it mean to be a Christian to me? Is it all talk and no action? What does it mean to be Christian? This is the heart of the Reformer's question. Is it a place? Is it to get safe, so to dwell in heaven? Or make the earth the kind of place where heaven is to break loose and get shot free of small expectations and dead imaginations? Is this too much for us? Is Jesus asking some kind of impossible? What does this mean, this betting your life on unseen realities? Now here's where we come in. Surrounded by such a cloud of veterans of the faith, let's strip off all the heavy, tight-fitting clothes and run with endurance, the race stretching out before us. Let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, the founder and guiding spirit of our way of life. My Protest-Ant friends, we are still needed. We are not only a quaint little circle quietly following Jesus in Asheville. We are the heirs of those who take to the streets to bring about God's reign here on earth. We do resist oppression. We do help others stand for justice. So keep on keeping on with your antics. Please, the world needs protesters because the Reformation still happens. A great cloud of witnesses. We only need our ears attuned and our eyes peeled for how the Reformation continues. Inside church walls, but also uncaged by them. Go for it. Make our ancestors proud.
Amen.
Amen.